Hello viewers, welcome to K Diagnostics, Dio here. Today we have a 2011 Toyota Highlander. In this video I'm going to show you how to remove and replace a front wheel bearing and a strut assembly on this vehicle. This vehicle came to us because the front end is making a loud clunking noise every time the vehicle is driven over a speed bump. I test drove the vehicle, I confirmed the customer's complaint. The noise is coming from the front strut. The strut is worn out. Actually, when I looked at it, there is oil leaking out of the shock absorber. So we're gonna replace the front struts, and the bearings are also noisy. When you're driving down the road, there is a loud growling noise coming from the wheel bearings. So we're gonna replace the bearings and the front struts. I'm gonna do that on both sides. I'm gonna show you how to remove the bearings and the struts on the driver's side. It's the same thing on both sides. I will do the passenger side off camera. This vehicle has press-in type wheel bearings. We're gonna have to remove the tire so we can get access to the steering knuckle. We're gonna remove the steering knuckle and take it to the press so we can press out the old wheel bearing. After we press out the old wheel bearing, we're gonna press in the new wheel bearing, okay? So now let's remove the tire first. So first things first, we're gonna remove the brake caliper. I'm gonna undo these two 14mm bolts for the brake caliper. Alright, so I got the caliper bolt removed. So now I'm gonna lift up the caliper. So we're gonna use this bungee cord to hang the caliper up here. Alright, so now we're gonna remove the brake pads. Alright, the pads are out. Okay, we're gonna have to unstick these caliper pins. Okay, now let's undo these two 17mm bolts for the caliper bracket. Alright, so here comes the caliper bracket. So the caliper bracket is removed. So now we're gonna remove the brake rotor. Let's undo the brake rotor. Actually, before I undo the brake rotor, since we're gonna remove the steering knuckle, I'm gonna undo these three bolts over here for the ball joint. I'm not gonna undo the ball joint from the nut over here, so I'm gonna undo it from these three bolts under the control arm, because this will be easier to remove. So I'm gonna put them back on there just a little bit because I don't want these ball joints to come out just yet. So that's good. So we're gonna remove the brake rotor. So right there. So now I'm gonna undo this drive axle nut. Alright, so now let's remove this nut. Alright, so here comes the axle nut. So now the next step is going to be undoing the outer tie rod. So I'm going to turn the steering knuckle this way. So I'm gonna remove the cotter pin first. So the cotter pin is removed. So now let's remove this outer tie rod nut. Alright, so we got the outer tie rod disconnected from the steering knuckle. So now we're gonna undo these big bolts over here that hold the steering knuckle on the strut. And these bolts are 22mm bolts. Alright, so we undid these bolts, so now we're gonna remove them. So once you get these nuts loose, you're gonna have to tap these bolts out. So here comes the first one. Okay, so we're gonna get that out of the way. Now I'm gonna leave this top one on there first because I have to undo this wheel speed. I have to undo this wheel speed sensor. Now I can remove this splash shield. I can take it out. That way when we take the steering knuckle to the press, it's not gonna get bent. Okay, so hopefully these bolts will come out easily, these 10mm bolts, so we can take this shield out of the way. So I'm gonna undo this tiny 10mm bolt that hold this splash plate on the steering knuckle. So there's one over here, there's another one here, and then there are two more down here that are just removed. This will allow us to remove this splash shield. Okay, so here comes the splash shield. So I'm gonna get it out of the way. So that's good. We have enough room over here. So now the next step is gonna be removing this wheel speed sensor. So I hope this wheel speed sensor bolt doesn't break. So let's see what happens. Oh, nice. It came out really easily. So that's good. So here comes the wheel speed sensor bolt. So here comes the sensor. So we're just gonna get it out of the way. So at this point, our steering knuckle should be able to come out. I'm gonna remove this big bolt up here. We're gonna push the axle inward. Okay. I'm gonna undo these two 17mm nuts over here for the ball joint. So now I should be able to lift up the steering knuckle. Alright, so here comes the steering knuckle. We're gonna take it to the press. We got the steering knuckle out of the way. I'm gonna undo this bolt over here that holds the brake caliper hose on the strut, because we're gonna remove the strut also. Alright, so we got that removed. Everything can just sit up here. So I'm gonna undo this nut over here for this sway bar link. And after we do that, we're gonna lower the vehicle so we can remove the strut assembly. Alright, we got the sway bar link nut removed. So that's good. So now let's lower the vehicle so we can remove the strut. I'm gonna show you the nuts that we have to undo so we can remove the strut assembly. So we're gonna have to come under this cowl over here. This cowl has some plastic tabs. So these tabs over here, so you basically push them up, and once you push them up, we have to undo these nuts over here. Okay, so there's this one over here, and then there's another one at this corner over here, right around this area below this wire loom. I'm gonna undo these three nuts so we can remove the strut assembly. Okay, so these three nuts over here hold the entire strut assembly over here on the body. Okay, so now I'm gonna undo these nuts so we can remove the strut assembly. Alright, so I got two nuts removed, so now I'm gonna remove the last one. Now what I need to do is, as I'm removing the last one, I have to hold the strut down here. Alright, so the strut assembly can now come out. So here is the whole strut. Okay, so the strut is removed. So I was undoing the nuts that go on these studs over here. So now let's take this strut assembly to the bench. Here is our strut assembly. This is the steering knuckle. We're gonna start by prepping the strut assembly first. I'm going to remove the spring of this strut. I'm gonna install this spring on the new strut, and then we're gonna press the bearing out of the steering knuckle, then we will press in the new bearing. Okay, now we're gonna use these strut spring compressors to compress this spring. So what we need to do is we have to install these in parallel. So we're gonna use the gun to tighten these two spring compressors up. That way they're gonna compress the spring. Alright, so that's good. Our spring is compressed. Okay, so now I'm going to undo this nut over here so that we can remove the strut mount and the spring. Once we undo this, there's a nut over here that we have to undo so we can remove the strut mount. Alright, so we removed the nut that holds the strut mount on the strut. So now I'm gonna get a hammer so we can tap the strut mount out. Alright, so we have to make sure that the strut mount over here is good. Okay, the strut mount doesn't look bad. It is good. Okay, so we're gonna reuse this strut mount. So now we can remove the spring. So here's the strut. Now this is completely worn out. Watch this. I'm gonna push it down. On the good strut, once this rod goes in, it should come out on its own. Look. Like, this is really bad. This is rotten. So this is really, really bad. The piston of the strut is not even going out, okay? So this is bad. This is what was causing the clunking noise every time the vehicle would go over a speed bump. So I'm gonna get this out of the way. So here is our new strut assembly. This is the part number 72766. So this is what we're gonna install. I'm going to get it out of the box. So let's get the new one out of the box. So here is our new strut. So here's the new nut that we have to install. So I'm gonna get the box out of the way. So I'm gonna use this Allen wrench to push the piston out. So I'm gonna twist it so that the piston can come out. So right there. Okay. So as you can see, this new piston is coming out. So I'm gonna push it down. Watch that. You see how it's coming out? Now I'm gonna grab the old one so we can compare both of them. So this is the new one, old one. So I'm gonna push the new one down. So I got both of them compressed. So I'm gonna lift them up. Watch this. You see that? This one is coming out. This one is stuck at the bottom. So this is bad, this is good. So we're gonna replace the strut boot. As you can see, the old boot is completely broken into pieces. So I got a new boot over here, and here's the part number. I don't know if you can see it. The part number is 63630. Okay, so we're gonna install this boot over here on the new shock. Okay, so we got the new boot on and this little bumper stopper over here. Now at this point we just gotta make sure that everything is sealing properly. Okay, so I'm making sure that the spring is seated, and now we're gonna install our strut mount. Alright, so we got everything lined up. So now I'm gonna insert the nut. Okay. So I'm going to push it first. Now the torque spec for this strut mount nut is 63 foot-pound. So we're gonna use our torque wrench and torque this nut. We're gonna torque it up to 63 foot-pound. So right there, I hope you heard the torque wrench click. So that was 63 foot-pound. So that's good. So that's tightened. So now we're gonna undo the spring compressors. All right, so now we can remove these strut compressors. So everything looks good. Here is our strut. Okay, so we got the strut ready. Now let's take the strut to the vehicle and install it. After we're done installing the strut, we're gonna come back to the bench so we can take this steering knuckle to the press and press the bearing out. So here is our new strut. We have put the spring on it. So now I'm gonna insert it down over here, and I'm gonna look through the holes over here and make sure that all the holes line up. So I got all the holes lined up. So now I'm gonna grab a nut. and put the nut on. So I got one nut started, so that's good. So now I'm gonna install the second nut. So I got all the nuts started. I'm gonna tighten them. Alright, so I got all the strut mount nut tightened. At this point, what I have to do is I just have to make sure that this cowl over here is lined up. Okay, we're just gonna push it down and make sure all the clips are back on. And then this one is gonna go over here. Alright, so everything is back together on this side. So now let's go press the bearing out of the steering knuckle. So here is our steering knuckle. So I'm going to remove this ring over here first, so we can get access to the bearing. So we're just gonna pry this up gently. Okay, so we're gonna put this over here, and now we're gonna remove this snap ring that's over here. Now actually, before we remove the snap ring, what I want to do is I want to remove the flange first. Okay, we're gonna tap the flange out first before we remove the snap ring. So right there, the flange came out. Okay, so here is the flange. So now we're gonna have to remove this inner race out of the flange. Okay, and then we're gonna remove the snap ring on this side so we can press the bearing out. All right. So here comes the inner race. So there it is. So now let's go remove the bearing out of the steering knuckle. So we gotta press the bearing out. So now we're gonna remove the wheel bearing snap ring. So there's this snap ring over here that we have to remove. So I'm gonna use this snap ring pliers. Alright, so here comes the snap ring. We're gonna put it over here out of the way. So now the wheel bearing should be able to come out. Okay, so at this point we should be able to press the bearing out. So now we're gonna press the bearing out. So now let's go to the press. I can feel the bearing coming out already. Alright, so here comes our wheel bearing. Okay, so here's the wheel bearing. I'm gonna get it out of the way. Now we're gonna prep the steering knuckle so we can press in the new wheel bearing. So there's the steering knuckle.